Hello, folks. What is up? Rick here from Cronos.org. Today we are going to have a workshop on how to build, a very simple React front-end application by using the create app method. And then we want to build, a little button that connects our front-end application with our wallet of choice. And finally, we also want to build a function that helps us to fetch any NFTs that might be assigned to that specific wallet, and ultimately then fetch it onto our website. But why don't we get started? So the very first thing that you want to do is you want to install a fresh Create React app, and you can use any of the official methods that is available on the Create React app.dev documentation, and then just create your basic React template. So once this is installed on your local machine, there's just a couple of things you want to be in mind. So I am using React scripts 4.0.3. Maybe you want to use the same just for consistency's sake. And then also I'm using the Web3 library, Web3 model, and D for styling and stuff like that. Axios for API calls, but you can use fetch if you want. That's really up to you. And then finally, we also want to use DeFi Connect, which we are going to use in the Web3 model. And yeah, another thing is, so what I did is I just replaced the CSS, the standard CSS, with the and the CSS, as you can see in here. That's and d/dist/and d CSS, and that's the one that I'm gonna use primarily here in the app. Right now, I just have a Hello Cronos text on the app. So if you go and visit, just launch the app, npm start run start. If you wanna go and see what's happening in the browser, you can just go here on the local host port 3000. And you see it just says hello Cronos. So I think, so what we're going to do next is, let's give it actually some styling. Maybe let's just remove this piece here. Which one? Just going to give it a name. Let's call it the Cronos app, the workshop app. Let's also maybe add an H2 header and add a quick description. And then maybe also some call to action. So in here, what I want to do is the library that I mentioned before, and it's actually what I want to use for the styling in here. So I want to use a primary button. Maybe that's not necessary. Too much text. Let's go back. Okay, I first have to import the button now from the package, from the library. And I can see what's happening in here. Maybe refresh this. And here we go. Now this is obviously an empty button, so we have to add some configuration, which we're gonna do next. All right. So I think the very first thing is you want to create a state for two objects. One is the data state, the data object, which is basically going to store some NFT token values, which we will need later on to basically, populate the page with images and stuff like that, give it some color. And we're gonna save that. We're gonna set the state to an array. And then as well, we want to set the state of our wallet address. Like so. And these are our state objects that we will be using in the example app. And now there's a couple of libraries that we want to import. So the first one is we're gonna use Web3 model. Once we click on the connect button, we also want to import the Web3 library. And we want to import Axios as well for, API calls that we might want to do. You can use other methods, you can use fetch, for example, but that's totally up to you. Okay. Now, before we start to use the model, the Web3 model, let's actually create a declaration. Actually, yeah, let's just create the declaration for our provider, because we're gonna store the provider into here, as well as the declaration for Web3. And now what we want to do is, there is a library, we could post it in here, but let's make it a little bit cleaner. Let's actually create a new folder and call it provider. And the provider is basically the method offered by, the provider is basically the wallet that you will use in order to provide the information to your decentralized app or your front end of choice. In the context of Web3 model, there's an option that we can use, and let's actually create just a file. We're gonna store this option in here, a constant, and then export it. Let's call it provider options GS. And then first thing we want to do is we want to import DeFi Web3 connector from DeFi Connect, which is the native Cronos wallet that we will use in Web3 models as well. And then what we want to do is we want to add our provider options. So this is available on our integration page. So I'm going to copy and paste it in here, but you can find that information obviously on the web extension integration. So you have the details in here, as you can see. This is now outside of the context of Web3 models specifically, but you get the point. You have the different options and the different variables that you want to use in the functions, and we just use them in the context of Web3 model by adding the custom example for the custom wallet. So that's how it's going to look like. We have display option, the package, which is the important piece. It imports the package into the provider option, and then the different options that we want to use, such as the supported chain IDs, the RPC methods, the polling interval, and then obviously the function, the synchronous function to connect to the provider. And then it returns the provider, which we then will use in our app JS file. So now we can close this and go ahead. What we want to do now is, as I mentioned before, we want to create a Web3 model configuration. Gonna call it Web3 model. So we initialize it with a new Web3 model. And in here we pass, for example, we can pass the option for cage provider. Now this is, I'm gonna set this to false, but this is optional. If you want to cache the provider details, you can set it to true, but it's optional really. But the option that is not optional is actually the provider options, which are required. And the provider options, they will come from the file that we just created. Okay. Just checking. Oh yeah, of course. Now we're good to go. Missed a comma after the first option. And now that we have the configuration for our Web3 model, what we want to do is we want to create a function. Actually, let's call it a synchronous function, connect. And this function is basically going to be triggered by our button. So I'm going to call here an event non-click. And basically, whenever we click on the button, it will trigger this asynchronous function here. But for now, the function is empty, so let's actually start to populate it. First thing we want to do is we want to create a condition. We want to check if there's a provider. And if there's non-provider, then we want to first thing we want to do is invoke provider in Web3, objects. And since they were declared initially in here, so we can actually now initialize them like so. With the web3 model.connect function. And we initialize web3 with the new web3 and pass the provider. Now what we want to do is we want to get the account details. We await the promise from web3. Ethereum get accounts. Obviously, you can also use the Ethereum request method to get the accounts. Which is actually, I think I was reading is the currently the most recommended approach. So I'm gonna go ahead and use the Web3 Ethereum get accounts method. Now we want to set the address, because what this does is it returns the accounts that are assigned to our provider, and we're gonna use the account that's assigned as index 0. And what will happen now is if I log the address, so what happened now after clicking on connect, the Web3 model is triggered and it shows me the default address, which is MetaMask and DeFi wallet. Now I'm specifically using MetaMask for this exercise because my NFT wallets are, my NFT assets are stored onto my Cronos address, which I passed to my MetaMask wallet. And what I want to do is, if I select MetaMask, okay, let's go back, see what happens. Provider, Web3. Oh, of course, I need to pass the provider, not the provider options in here. So if I go back now and try to test it again and connect, now I should see my address being logged. Here we go. Now that that worked, let's go ahead with our exercise. Because the next thing we want to do is we want to actually get all my token IDs so that I can use the token URI method that I have in the contract that I will add in a second. And this is a bit of a workaround to actually get all unique images, assets that I own. And for that, we will use a contract and APIs that are assigned to the NFT contract where the NFTs are being generated. And the first thing that we want to do is we need to create a new folder. And this time we're going to call it contract. And in here, we want to create a new file, which you want to call NFT collection JS. And in here, I'm gonna paste the ABI details and the contract where the NFTs are hosted. So that if you go, I'm gonna quickly show you what I mean by that. So there is an NFT faucet that Cronos provides, and I have used this NFT faucet, which works very similar to the OpenSea um, testnet platform that allows you to create NFT assets on a testnet so that you can play around with the NFTs as well. And what I do here is I do have a contract address for those test NFTs. And the contract address, if you use Chronoscan or the Explorer, will also help you get information on the ABI, which you can then copy into this constant in here. So now that this is done, what I want to do is I want to import these details like so, and I want to create a constant for the contract. And here we're going to use the Web3 Ethereum contract to pass the two options that we just created. Let me have a look. Contract NFT collections. Oh, okay. Now let's test if you're able to lock the contract. And here we go. So as you can see, here we have all of the inputs. And we will be working a lot with the token URI, which we will use, to get the unique metadata of each of the tokens that one of these addresses owns, or specifically the address that I use for this exercise. Okay, in order to achieve that, first thing I want to do is I want to get all of my token data, and I'm going to use Axios to achieve that, and the Cronos Explorer API endpoint. So I'm just gonna paste in the address here that I'm gonna use. So https cronos.org explorer testnet tree API, the module is account, and the action is token and address. That's what we want. And also, I see that I was outside the condition. We want to keep this within the main condition in the connect function. Next, I only want, because this is going to return a couple of fields and arrays, the value that is important for us. Let's say we're going to use only the data results. Which contains the specific information that we want to use. And then I want to use a function to only retrieve the unique IDs. So function get unique, and then I'm gonna map to index. I store the keys of the unique objects, then I eliminate the dead keys and store the unique IDs. And last but not least, I remove any key when the result is null. And by doing that, I will be able to have my unique token details, which you will need, to create an array with the collection that I own. So if you're gonna log that, you're gonna see what happens with our token. Our token is basically declared and initialized with the function that we just created to return the unique IDs. And here we go. These are basically my unique tokens. But as you can see, I don't have the metadata in here yet. To get the metadata, I want to use the token URI that was set in our contract. So what we want to do next is we want to create a collection. So let's declare connection as an array and initialize it as an array. And what we want to do next is we want to create a for loop. I'm gonna just paste it in here. So let's have a look at this for loop. So it starts as index 0, and it goes for as long as there's a token length. So the token length is basically the amount of tokens that I have, and it will run incrementally until it reaches the token length. And the first thing that I want to do here is we want to create a variable for token meta URI, and we want to await a promise. And we are going to use the contract methods token URI, which I mentioned before. And in here, we're going to use the token index in order to get the token ID and run the call. Also, what we want to do is, because we are using IPFS in this specific example, to store the metadata of the NFTs, we want to replace the standard IPFS protocol here with an HTTPS protocol so that the server isn't blocked when we try to fetch the details. And then we want to fetch the metadata and save it as a JSON. And again, we will replace the IPFS with the HTTPS method because we want to specifically get the images. And once we get the images, we want to push the returned data into the collection array that we have declared here. And what will be returned is actually, so if I log the collection, we should see the specific metadata for, yeah, here we go, the tokens that I own. And that's the image. So now that this worked, what we want to do is we want to set the state of our data object by passing the collection that we just created. And what we can do is we can create here in the front end a new field. I'm gonna call it, maybe we don't need the h1 header here, but here we're just gonna write NFT collection owned by address. Keep it simple. And in here, now we want to run a loop with the new data that we have. Like this. And what we want to do here is we want to pass maybe first, standard key, which is our index, and then our source. And in our source, we will want to loop through the image fields, and also maybe alt tag. Maybe let's just put the index in the alt tag. Maybe you can put the name. Here we use URI, token ID, and image. Maybe you could have passed the name as well, and you could have put the name here in the alt tag. But for now, let's just use it this way. And we also want to add a little bit of styling maybe here. So NFT image, and this comes from our app CSS file. So you can see here I created a CSS class with width, height, border, and border radius, and then as well a little bit of margin. And yeah, I think also another thing we could add is, as you can see, the address is assigned, but the value is never used. Let's just assign, let's actually just print out the value in here. Okay. Now that this is completed, let's actually go and check out. Yeah, it worked. So if I go and connect with my MetaMask address, first I get my address, and then I will be able to fetch also my items into the page. And this is it in a nutshell. I hope you like this workshop, and if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us.